Hey everyone, William here. I'm back again with another development update video for Manifold Garden. It's been a while since the last update. Mostly we've just been keeping our heads down and working away on the game. I've got some good news. The game is now finally playable from start to finish. You can load up the game, see the start screen, play through the game, get to the ending, see the credits, and then go back to the start screen. This is a major milestone for us. Of course, there's still plenty left to do. The credit sequence is filled with placeholder text. There are areas and puzzles that need to be tweaked, bugs that need to be fixed, and code that needs to be optimized. But we're on schedule and things are coming together nicely. In this video, I'm going to be going through the different parts of the game and talk about what we've been doing and where things are currently at. 3 months ago, the biggest issue was getting the save system and the level loading system to work together. The save system was a problem for a really long time. A lot of it was due to the complexity and the initial way it was set up. We have persistent save, so you can carry objects between levels, save the game at any point, and restore to that exact state. On top of that, we have dynamic level loading. Once you start a game, there is no load screen of any kind. Instead, levels are loaded and unloaded dynamically in the background based on your position. Because of the way the world wrapping works in Manifold Garden, each level is connected to another level with portals. When a player walks through a portal, they are actually teleported to another position. To maintain a smooth transition, both levels need to be loaded and enabled simultaneously. To pull this off, we use a number of tricks. First, levels are divided into main levels and hallway levels. Main levels are connected to each other with a hallway level in between. Also, main levels are located at the origin, 0, 0, 0, while hallways are located much farther away, something like 2000, 2000, 2000. This does mean that there could be some floating point errors with the hallways, but they tend to be much smaller spaces, so generally players aren't spending a whole lot of time there. Another trick we do is we apply different render layers for the levels and selectively filter out which ones the camera can see. This means you could have two levels loaded on top of each other, but the player only sees one of them. Unity allows you to have up to 4 render layers for the camera to filter between. This is a custom tool we have for making connections between levels. Each gray box represents a scene, and these are the portals that are in the scene. So the color indicates the gravity orientation of the portal. A blue line, that means it's a blue portal connected to another blue portal. It shows which portals are connected to each other. And generally, portals connect to portals in other scenes, but you can also have portals connect to portals in the same scene. The number at the top here is the render layer, which can be set to 0, 1, 2, or 3. In general, adjacent levels have different render layers so that players don't see two levels overlapping. Okay, so let's say this is a map of the game. We have world A, B, C, D, E, and F. Those are the main levels, and in between you have the hallway levels. When you're in world A, we load the hallway that's connected to it and world B, the neighbor level. World A and the hallway have the interior section colored, and that means those scenes are enabled. So even though world B has been loaded, all of the objects in that scene are actually inactive. Everything else in the game is unloaded. Now, when the player moves from world A into the hallway, initially nothing changes. World A is still enabled, as is the hallway, obviously, because that's where the player is. However, as the player moves closer to world B, we actually disable world A and enable world B. Then, when the player completes that transition and moves into world B, we then load in the neighbor levels that are connected to world B. This is happening automatically in the background as the player moves through the game. And getting this to work with the save system was a nightmare. Like I said earlier, in the game, you can carry cubes across levels. You can start with a cube in world A, bring it all the way to world F. However, by then, world A is unloaded, and if you save the state, you need to make sure that the data in world A is updated as well. Anyway, the point is there's a lot going on behind the scenes with levels loading and unloading and save data needing to be updated all the time. I didn't account for all the scenarios when I first implemented the save system, so a lot of details were overlooked. And so there were just a lot of cases where you'd move a cube between levels and the game wouldn't update the data, which would lead to duplicate items in a dictionary, which would give you an error. And then, of course, saving and loading would just get stuck. Obviously, this was a pretty big problem and prevented playtesters from getting very far in the game. Happy to say that finally now these are all fixed. At least we haven't seen any of these issues from playtesters in quite a while. Otherwise, for tech, it's been a lot of little bugs here and there, object physics behaving weirdly, being able to no clip into the wall if you change gravity at just the right time, or just the right angle, rather, stuff like that. And we've been addressing these issues as they've come up. We were having a lot of issues with audio at one point, sounds crackling, sounds getting delayed, sounds not playing at all. A lot of these problems didn't come up when we were testing individual levels, but once you have the whole game running with hundreds of objects all loaded, all making a sound, that's when it became an issue. Fortunately, a lot of the problems have since been solved. So I'm just going to show a short preview of the game without me talking so you can kind of get a sense of where things are at. We've also added an audio occlusion system. The basics of it are pretty straightforward. The tricky part was getting audio occlusion to work across portals, which there are plenty of in the game. So I'm going to hand things off to Garrett, who wrote the system, and he's going to talk a bit about how that's set up and how we pull off these tricks.
Hello, my name is Garrett Polk, and I'm working on the game Manifold Garden, and today I wanted to show off the audio occlusion system we've built into the game. An audio occlusion system is a system to reduce the volume and high frequencies of sounds in the game as they are blocked by objects in the world, such as walls and floors. So to do this in Manifold Garden, we also have to accommodate the portals in the game. So we have portals that the player can see through and walk through, which are actually connections to completely different parts of the game world. So part of this challenge is to separate the position of the sound as the player hears it versus the position that it actually exists in the game world. So let's take a look briefly and see, or hear, I should say, what this sounds like. So here we have a line, and the little yellow dots on it represent the occlusion system ray tracing. So we're going to ray trace from the player's head to these dots. In these cases, they just have one dot, and the door here has 7 dots, 4 around the outside, 1 in the center, and 1 that sticks out a bit from it to represent sort of an echoing effect. As we move in the world, these objects become blocked, and we reduce the volume of the door sound. Now we also have to handle portals. So as the player moves forward here, they're going to go through a portal. Now visually on the left you can see the hallway beyond, but on the right you can see that the doorway immediately ends with a portal on the other side. So when the player moves through the portal, we actually bring the sound with them. So the yellow dots are teleported to the same position relative to the player. So I'm going to walk through this portal backwards so that you can see what I'm talking about. Here are the dots that representing the door sound. And here we go through the portal, and the dots are brought with us. So what you end up getting is a seamless transition and a preservation of the occlusion as the player goes through the portal. That's it. Thanks for listening.
As far as the art in the game, things are pretty much set. Mostly what we're dealing with now is polish. There are minor things like this button here needs to be updated to match the style of the cube. Instead of using the texture, the pattern needs to be in the actual geometry. We still need to play around with some color correction. I think the green here is, we kind of have the apple green on the leaves, but then the rest, you've got this acid neon green, and they just don't seem to go well together, but it's fairly minor details. There's also a couple of acids that need to be improved to better communicate their design as well. For example, for these structures, there needs to be a bigger difference between the on and the off state. Design has undergone a pretty significant change in the last 6 months. Just a heads up, this section is a little spoilerish, so I'd recommend skipping forward a bit if you want to not know anything before going into the game. Anyway, a few months ago, a couple of game developers here in Chicago played through the game, and we chatted about it afterwards. And one of the feedback I received was that, there are some really, really fantastic moments in the game, but also a lot of tedium, and a lot of that is sort of due to the player getting lost and not knowing where they have to go next. And when you have that feeling and it's combined with the gravity changing and the wool wrapping, it's just incredibly disorienting, and you have a really hard time kind of getting yourself back on the right track. So took a look at the game, and I think a big part of this was that we had this very convoluted, non-linear structure to the game. On top of that, we also had this cadence of massive open level followed by a tiny hallway followed by a massive open level, and there were two problems with this. The first is that the large open levels, they present a navigational challenge. When players first enter, they're overwhelmed by the size of the space. This is intentional. They're a little lost, but they have to explore, become familiar with the space, and by the end, they're using their understanding of the space to navigate and solve puzzles. In small doses, this is fine, but with the pattern that we had before, we were basically presenting players with a level like this every other level. And players would have to do all this work to solve this massive level, and before they can really enjoy the fruits of their labor, they're presented with another similar challenge. From a pacing perspective, this just wasn't working. Another problem with having so many of these outdoor levels was that their impact was being diluted. They are intended to be key moments in the game. Like, they're vistas that really impress the player, and they're supposed to stick with them long after the game is over. They need to feel special, but when you're coming across them every other level, they are not that impactful. So the new cadence that the game follows is, instead of having massive open level, tiny hallway, massive open level, tiny hallway, we focus instead on more mid-sized indoor levels. Once they're in the sequence, they're kind of moving through it with relative ease and getting like a really clear sense of progression. And it offers a pretty big contrast from the outdoor levels, both visually and from a pacing standpoint. I think the intention of what each level is supposed to do is much more clear to the player. Another change we've made is we've streamlined the path that the player takes through the game. So as I mentioned earlier, there are different kinds of getting lost, the good kind and the bad kind. And I think in the good kind, you're in a space you know you're supposed to explore. The second kind of getting lost is where you just have no idea what you're working towards. We found that the second type, this kind of I have no idea where I'm supposed to go, players often kind of stumbled across that because of the sort of very convoluted nonlinear structure. They weren't sure if they were on the right path or not. It wasn't until I sat down and did the math that I realized there were 64 different ways to go through the game, and there was just no way I could balance all that and make all those paths good. And so what I should have started with was a core sequence. This is the ideal path, and then we branch off from there. Maybe some puzzles are too easy for some players, some are a little bit too hard. So we offer alternate routes for players of different types, but generally we know where we're supposed to be guiding the player. Took a step back and streamlined that experience, and we've been seeing really, really positive results with the playtesters. Before, we were seeing players kind of get to about 90 minutes and then stopping because they were too overwhelmed. And now we're seeing players go for 4, 5, 6 hours. Between all the design changes, development, overseeing the project, trying to get funding, I haven't really had much time left for anything else. I know I haven't been posting updates on Twitter or the devlog frequently, but that is something I'm hoping to get back to now that we've crossed a major threshold and are settling into more of a routine. We're on track to get the game out in early 2019. I know at the beginning of this year that I said 2018 was going to be the year. We didn't quite make it, but we did make a lot of progress. There are still several things that need to be sorted out before we can announce a launch date. Anyway, I'm excited to be in this final stretch of development. It's been a very long journey, and there's still some ways to go, but I'm so happy to have made it this far. In the coming months, we're going to be publishing a series of articles and videos explaining all the tech in the game, how our graphics pipeline works, what the tools that we made, how we're optimizing levels, and so on. If you want to stay up to date, we have a mailing list. You can sign up. You can also subscribe to this YouTube channel. I'm on Twitter. We have a Discord. I also stream development daily, almost daily, on Twitch. And you can also wishlist the game on Steam. All the links can be found in the video description below. That is it for this time. Thank you for your support, and I will see you around.